And we're now in the first Sunday of May. Lord have mercy. And today, we're starting a new teaching series. But before I introduce it, how many enjoyed our last teaching series, The Divine Design? Who enjoyed it? Anybody got anything from it? Amen. Amen. The Divine Design was a series that focused on the ways in which God designed us, that prepares us for, it leads us into our destiny. But our next teaching series for 2025 is entitled Get Rid of It. I promise you I'm going to clarify it. Don't worry. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. The aim of this Get Rid of It series focuses on one of the major oppositional forces of our divine design and destiny. Anybody thinking about what I'm going to say? Excuses. Yeah, I am. I am. I am. If you're here, let's just clarify. If you're here, I'm talking to you. We're going to make it real clear. We're going to start off before I get going. Struggling to stand up and walk in our divine design may become a consistent cycle when we continue to make very human excuses. And during this Get Rid of It series, we'll focus on relinquishing our excuses and the enablers that stand in the way of us doing what God has designed and called us to do. I really want to make sure, and throughout this series, we'll lean into the dangers of making excuses. So let's do a little bit of groundwork, as is often my custom, because I don't like confusion. I consider myself a Renaissance man, and one of those things is that I have to be at least somewhat adept at conversations. So I am going to clarify every word and phrase that we'll be using before I move forward. For the note takers in the room, this is where you start. The word excuse, two definitions. Definition one, to release from an obligation or duty. To release from an obligation or duty. Definition number two, to seek or obtain exemption or release for oneself. Once again, to seek or obtain exemption or release for oneself. Now, my objective behind taking time to define what an excuse is so we can differentiate between what it is and what it isn't. Because many of us believe that we have valid reasons not to do what God has designed and called us to do. But in actuality, what we perceive to be valid excuses or valid reasons are invalid excuses. And I'm going to make it very clear. The purpose for a reason is to explain why something happened, to provide context or clarity. Reasons typically involve taking responsibility for the outcome, even if it wasn't ideal. So, for example, a reason would be I didn't go minister because I was in the hospital. Now, I know that God will often bring ministry to you in the hospital. Please don't ask me how I know. I don't want to talk about it today. But the purpose for an excuse is to deflect blame or avoid consequences, often by attributing the problem to external factors or circumstances. Excuses tend to minimize or deny personal responsibility for the outcome. What does that look like, Pastor Matthew? I'm glad you asked. An excuse is, I couldn't go minister because I'm afraid of what I'll encounter when I get there. An excuse is, I couldn't go minister because it didn't go well the last time I went. An excuse is, I'm not going to serve or assist my new pastor because of the way my last pastor treated me. I'm not saying that it didn't hurt. And I'm not saying that you don't need to heal. You absolutely do. Jesus and therapy. Amen. But if we are to experience the fullest extent of God's divine destiny for our lives, then we have to release our firm grasp on excuses. There is a time, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, there is a time for everything. So I'm not upset at you for taking time to heal, but that time is not all the time. There's a time for rehab, and then there's a time to start walking again. And I'm telling you, All Nations, New York, we're doing away with the perpetual rehab. We're doing away with it. We're doing away with it. Please, please, please don't get uncomfortable. There is more than enough time for that. I promise you. I promise you. I am going to take my time today. We're going to deal with it. We're going to lay this foundation, and we are going to be a changed people through this Get Rid of It series. Amen? So for my message today, I'd like to address what I believe is a constant and consistent experience which leads to constant excuses in the body of Christ. And the real danger of this particular excuse is that it so well masquerades as a reason. Before I get to my scriptural text for this afternoon, I'd like us to consider some context from the words of Jesus Christ. Just a little bit of context to set the scene. I'm going to go to John 15, 16 through 22 in the Amplified Version. John 15, 16 through 22 in the Amplified Version. Help me, Lord. 16 says, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and I have appointed and placed and purposefully planted you so that you would go and bear fruit and keep on bearing, and that your fruit will remain and be lasting, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, as my representative, he may give to you. This is what I command you, that you love and unselfishly seek the best for one another." Why? Because if the world hates you, and it does, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you belonged to the world would love you as its own and would treat you with affection. But you are not of the world, You no longer belong to it, but I have chosen you out of the world. And because of this, the world hates you. He's not like wavering with this. This sounds like a promise. 20 says, remember and continue to remember that I told you a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Will. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But they will do all these hurtful things to you for my name's sake. Because you bear my name and are identified with me. For they do not know the one who sent me. 22 says, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have the guilt of their sin. But now they have no excuse. Jesus in verse 17 gives us a commandment to his disciples, for his disciples, that amongst themselves they have to love and unselfishly seek the best for one another. Why? Because the very next verse he says, because the world hates you. And oftentimes, I wonder why we're struggling so much with the love thing in these churches when that's oftentimes the only place where we're going to get it, because as soon as you walk out these doors, you are going to experience hate. You are going to experience persecution, so that means that we have to get that love thing right in here, y'all. If you're taking notes, write it down. If you're not taking notes, write it down. We have to get this love thing right, y'all. We gotta get it right. So verse 19 says, you are not of the world, you no longer belong to it, and because of it, the world hates you. Verse 20 says, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Verse 21 says, they will do all these hurtful things to you for my name's sake. And for anyone who believes that all this persecution sounds like a whole lot, Jesus gives the reason for it in verse 22 when he says, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have the guilt of their sin removed. But now they have no excuse. You can't tell me that because we have grace, we also have a license for excuses. Paul would say, of course not, would be his reply. Read Romans for yourself. It's a good one. But as we talk about these particular excuses, the excuse that the world would use for their sin, what happens if all of the persecution that we just read about starts to bring about excuses amongst the disciples? That's you. That's me. That's us. Jesus comes to remove the excuse for sin from the world, but within persecution, oftentimes we see the excuses starting to rise up from the disciples. What happens when we as disciples just can't stomach being hated by the world because we're too busy seeking acceptance from the world? So we start making excuses to God about why the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19, go ye into all the world, why that doesn't apply to me. God, they didn't treat me right last time I went. And Jesus is saying in his word that they're not going to. That's not an excuse. I'm not saying that there's something inherently wrong with our need for acceptance. I'm not saying that. But if you are a disciple of Christ, your acceptance will not come from the world. And if you're not a disciple of Christ, your acceptance will not come from the world. But verse 16 says, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and I have appointed and placed and purposely planted you." There's your acceptance. In verse 19, Jesus says, "I have chosen you out of the world." There's your acceptance. Jesus in verse 21 says, "Because you bear my name and are identified with me." Jesus, through this whole interaction, is speaking through affirming and acceptance language. Why? Why? I'm going to tell you what I think. Jesus, in his constant affirmation and acceptance language, masterfully speaks through the main antidote for what contextually seems to be one of the primary forms of persecution we as Christ followers will experience. Yes, you're right. Today's message is about rejection. We're going to talk about rejection today. Because if we're honest, there aren't many things that we're going to experience that drive us toward excuses like a good old rejection experience. And in the context of John 15, we're talking about rejection from the world, but don't let that rejection come from church people. Those excuses turn all the way up. We feel justified in doing it too, because when it's rejection, those invalid excuses start looking like really valid reasons. But let me be extremely clear before we go any further. There is no valid excuse or reason for your disobedience to God. There is no valid excuse or reason for your apathy concerning the things of God. There is no valid excuse or reason for your spiritual self-sabotage. Your rejection experience is not a license. Especially when the entire reason why God allowed the rejection or used the rejection was to grow you up. Because we often only look at rejection one way. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Let's get to our actual text for today. 1 Samuel chapter 8. I love it that God had Prophet Samuel do the opening prayer today. I said, Lord, you know. 1 Samuel chapter 8. Let's do, you know what, let's get a little bit of context. Let's start at 7. 1 Samuel chapter 7. I'm gonna start at verse 7. And I'm gonna read a little bit in the Message version today. the Message version. 1 Samuel 7:7 is where I'm starting in the Message version. It says, when the Philistines heard that Israel was meeting at Mizpah, the Philistine leaders went on the offensive. Israel got the report and became frightened. Philistines on the move again. Then they pleaded with Samuel, pray with all your might and don't let up. Pray to God, our God, that he'll save us from the boot of the Philistines. Samuel took a young lamb, not yet weaned. Yes, Lord. Y'all didn't catch it. Samuel took a young lamb, not yet weaned, and offered it as a whole burnt offering to God. He prayed fervently to God, interceding for Israel, and God answered. While Samuel was offering the sacrifice, the Philistines came within range to fight Israel. Just then, God thundered, a huge thunderclap exploding among the Philistines. They panicked, mass confusion, and scattered before Israel. Israel poured out of Mizpah and gave chase, killing Philistines right and left to a point just beyond Bethkar. Samuel took a single rock and set it up right between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, Rock of Help, saying, this marks the place where God helped us. The Philistines learned their lesson and stayed home. I like that. I like that. This Message version is doing it for me today. The Philistines learned their lesson and stayed home. This is what happens when you pray. This is what happens when you let God do it. These fights that we're preparing to fight won't be fights anymore because the adversary will just decide, I don't want to fight anymore. 13, the Philistines learned their lesson and stayed home. No more border crossings. God was hard on the Philistines all through Samuel's lifetime. All the cities from Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored. Israel also freed the surrounding countryside from Philistine control. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel gave solid leadership to Israel his entire life. Every year he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal and Mizpah. He gave leadership to Israel in each of these places, but always he would return to Ramah, where he lived, and preside from there. This is where he built an altar to God. Chapter 8, verse 1. But then Samuel got to be an old man. He set his sons up as judges in Israel. His firstborn son was named Joel, the name of his second Abijah. And they were assigned duty in Beersheba, but his sons didn't take after him. They were out for what they could get for themselves, taking bribes, corrupting justice. My goodness. Fed up, all the elders of Israel got together and confronted Samuel at Ramah. They presented their case. Look how they started. Look, you're an old man, and your sons aren't following in your footsteps. Here's what we want you to do. Appoint a king to rule us just like everybody else. Verse 6, when Samuel heard their demand, give us a king to rule us, he was crushed. But Samuel prayed to God. God answered Samuel, go ahead and do what they're asking. They are not rejecting you. They've rejected me as their king. From the day I brought them out of Egypt until this very day, they've been behaving like this, leaving me for other gods, and now they're doing it to you. So let them have their own way, but warn them of what they're in for. Tell them the way kings operate. My goodness. Just what they're likely to get from a king. So Samuel told them and delivered God's warning to the people who were asking him to give them a king. My text verse is verse 7. God answered Samuel, "Go ahead and do what they're asking. They are not rejecting you. They've rejected me as their king." Now, I have a question. And it is out of this interrogation for this text where my title comes from today. God tells Samuel in verse 7 the confrontation with the elders that crushed him. This confrontation that very easily would have been interpreted as personal rejection by any of us wasn't personal rejection at all. It was rejection of God's divine kingship and not Samuel's human leadership. But if that's the case, and if God truly loves Samuel, why would God allow Samuel to experience the rejection that didn't even belong to him? Samuel not only experienced the rejection, he was crushed by it. But it wasn't his. It didn't belong to him. Why? My title for today is Rejection School. Rejection School. Rejection School. Provocative title, I know. And I'm calling this Rejection School because if we're not careful, we'll only be able to comprehend rejection as a form of mental, emotional, and spiritual attack. And I'm not saying that it's always, it's never not that. It is that sometimes. But I'm also saying it's probably not always that. And from what we can only perceive as attack, if immature, we'll immediately give ourselves license to start making excuses and calling them reasons. Especially when God is in disagreement with that posture and he's consistently telling you that he is not in line with it. But if we can only see the rejection as an attack and we start making excuses and using them as coping mechanisms, we may miss that it can sometimes be a divinely allowed and assigned lesson in growth and maturation, or simply put, spiritual strength training. Let's go back to the text. Verse 4, chapter 8, verse 4 says, "Fed up, all the elders of Israel got together and confronted Samuel at Ramah. They presented their case. Look, you're an old man." Now, I think this is so funny because that word elders doesn't mean what we would think it means in a church context. Wasn't people wearing collars, it wasn't people on the stage. These were literally old people. So you got a group of old people coming to confront one old person to tell him that he's too old. And amongst the laughter, I don't want you to miss it because this is often how rejection works. You'll have this rejected person or rejected people going around rejecting other persons or people because they themselves were rejected. And before you know it, the newly rejected person is part of the rejection consortium because their newly framed rejection identity craves acceptance. And now they're all walking around looking for the next person to play their rejection game with. This is exactly how it works. I decline, though. I decline. I'm not playing that one. I'm not playing that way. Not playing. Verse 5, they presented their case. Look, you're an old man, and your sons aren't following in your footsteps. Not only did they call him old, which is a form of rejection, and nowadays against the law, but that wasn't bad enough. Age discrimination, that's what I'm talking about. They start talking about his kids. In a way, the inference is there. They're talking about him potentially as a father. This is how rejection works. It just goes down the line. It finds one thing that's wrong or one thing that they don't like, moves down the list. Another thing that they don't really understand, they address that and it moves down the list. And then they say, here's what we want you to do. Question, who's in charge here? It's certainly not these old people that are ganging up on Samuel. But now Samuel has to receive this perceived rejection from these people. They're inferring that he doesn't know how to do his job. Verse 6, when Samuel heard their demands, he was crushed. And for those of us who've experienced rejection, often in the ways that I'm listing that Samuel is experiencing here, I think we have to understand that regardless, I don't care how tough you are, eventually you're going to come into some rejection experience that will, in fact, crush you. It has to. But notice what Samuel immediately does. Samuel didn't start making excuses. Samuel didn't say, well, I didn't even really want to do this anyway. I just came to this church to sit in the back, so I'm going to just go back to the back. Excuse. Samuel didn't say, oh, well, I should have just stayed at my last church. At least those were people that I actually liked. Excuse. Well, I'm going to go down the list. I'm going to touch on them all today, I promise you. Notice this crushing did not lead Samuel to excuses. This crushing led Samuel to prayer. And I got a question. How many of us are spending more time sitting with the rejection than we are praying about it? Because if Samuel prayed, God immediately tells him that rejection that you experienced is not yours. But a lot of us have not received that same revelation from God because we never asked him, because we never prayed about it, because we were too busy right after the point of rejection making excuses. We got to be careful. Here's some of my favorite ones. Well, they can have it. We'll see how far they'll get without me. Every time I say yes to God, something like this happens. Excuse, excuse, excuse. But then we get to 7. We get to verse 7. God answered Samuel and said, "Go ahead and do what they're asking. They are not rejecting you. They have rejected me." And I have another question, because you know I'm a question-asking man. How many of us are carrying moments, interactions, and even seasons of rejection that don't even belong to us? I'm telling you that every instance of rejection that you experience doesn't immediately have to go into the personal rejection bucket. And if we're honest, many of your personal rejection buckets are already full. Why do we immediately run there? We can just go to God in prayer, and God may tell you that the rejection that you experienced does not even belong to you. But God may have allowed you to experience that rejection because He wants to use it to teach you and make you. But His original intent was not for you to hold on to it, to develop it as a rejection identity. His original intent was not for you to start making excuses about why you're done with ministry for real this time, and about 2 steps away from being done with church altogether. This is not the time for that. This is not the time for that. This is growing time. This is not running time. This is growing time. This is not excuse time. And in verse 9, immediately after what could have been perceived as personal rejection, God immediately gives Samuel an assignment. He tells them, those people that you think personally rejected you, go and show them grace. Tell them what they're about to get into. And how many of us would have immediately found ourselves in disobedience and said, "I'm not telling those people anything"? They made this bed. Y'all know it. But we're calling this rejection school. We're calling this rejection school. So you may say, "Pastor Matthew, where's the relevance in the title?" Well, I'm going to try my best to make it clear for you. There is, before Samuel's enrollment in rejection school, there was no instance that I can find of Samuel using oil. Not one time. But after rejection school's enrollment, we see it twice where he has to go and anoint Israel's first 2 kings. Saul in chapter 10, David in chapter 16. Maybe Samuel's enrollment in rejection school, or if we're making it personal, your enrollment in rejection school, and the crushing you encountered because of it is for the oil that you are going to have to use in your next season. Because we know that we don't get oil without a process that we all hate called crushing. I do too. I do too. Hate it. Hate it. But it's for your benefit. See, God has assignments, God has things in mind for you to do. And this rejection experience, this crushing, is allowing you and enabling you to do something that you would not have been able to do before. And the very, very interesting thing, the very, very interesting thing about the second time Samuel used oil, 1 Samuel chapter 16, he had to carry it first. I'll read it for you. 1 Samuel 16:1 in the Amplified. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve for Saul when I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, then go." Notice, he did not get to fill the horn when he got to Jesse's house. He had to fill the oil before he even left, and he had to carry the oil. I don't know how long the journey was to Bethlehem. I don't know. But Samuel had to fill this horn and carry this oil to Jesse's house. What if pre-rejection school you're weak? What if pre-rejection school the oil that you have to carry is too heavy for you? God, in his infinite wisdom and grace, still loving you, allows you to experience the crushing of rejection school, because that crushing after healing would make you stronger and give you the ability, give you the spiritual capacity to not only carry the oil, but to use it effectively. Because one thing I know about rejection, if rejection is your strongest sense, if rejection is the feeling you feel the most or often lead with, you will not pour correctly. Your rejection can't come to Jesse's house. Your rejection can't come to Jesse's house, because this is the king that's gonna get it right. This is the king that has my heart. So you gotta leave that rejection there. You have to lean that grieving and rejection behind, because I have something amazing for you to do. And you wanna know what was so interesting about that? I know I say interesting a lot. I'm talking about the Bible, that really is. That That wasn't the only king attached to David. There was another king that would come from Bethlehem. There was another king that would understand rejection fully. So we couldn't have anybody carrying a half full horn of oil, pouring in a way that's not liberal, holding back on the poor. This oil that you're pouring is directly connected to millions and billions of people's deliverance. You cannot hold back on this pour. So you have to go to rejection school. Y'all don't believe me. Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53. Help me, Lord. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and pain, and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised. And we did not appreciate his worth or esteem him. But in fact, he has borne our griefs. And he has carried our sorrows and pains, yet we ignorantly assumed that he was stricken, struck down by God, and degraded and humiliated by him. But he was wounded for our transgressions. Yes, Lord. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed. He was crushed. He was crushed. He was crushed for our wickedness, our sin, our injustice, our wrongdoing. The punishment required for our well-being fell upon him. And by his stripes, by his wounds, we are healed. Verse 7. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Somebody say no excuses. He did not open his mouth to complain or defend himself. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before her shearers, so he did not open his mouth. 10. Yet the Lord was willing to crush him, causing him to suffer. If he would give himself as a guilt offering and atonement for sin, he shall see his spiritual offspring. He shall prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord shall succeed and prosper in his hand. Can we trust God to crush us through rejection school enrollment? Can we trust God through his ways and his methods to prepare us for the oil that we not only have to carry, but we have to pour? Can we trust him with that? I know this hurts, God, but I trust you. I don't like this, I hate this, and I hate them, but God, I trust you. And I know for sure that all of our rejections didn't belong to God. Some of them did, but some of them were real. Some of our rejections are legit. There's some times and some instances where it was personal. My parents left me. Friends walked out on me. Job left me. It is so many things that I'm sure we've experienced. I promise you, if I took the time to listen to everyone's rejection experiences in here, I don't think, actually, I'd probably be real early for church next Sunday. Probably be here for the whole week. But can we trust God to use our rejection experience? Can we trust God to use our rejection school enrollment for our good? If Romans 8:28 is true, and it is, then this rejection is part of the working together. It's part of it. It's part of it. It has to be part of it. But I promise you, y'all, we cannot start making excuses because God is trying to prepare us for something. What if, in experiencing rejection, God is moving us in line for promotion, and because of our excuses, we step right out of it? Everybody loves the promotion talk, but there are going to be some things that come with it. You're not going to be able to operate in the promoted level with the same strength level that you did in the level previously. So God has to prepare you before he promotes you, and one of the ways that he chooses to do it is through rejection.